Educational equity and language diversity awareness.
Cool. So unfortunately, I can't stay for the Q&A at the end, so you're going to get 5 plus a little bit. So today we're talking about reading, but I'm not talking about books. I'm talking about the discourse practice of reading among drag queens. So this is the wiki entry for to read someone to filth, meaning to thoroughly insult, to comprehensively call attention to the flaws of someone. Jeremy Calder defines reading as the art of ritual insult as practiced within communities of drag queens, trans people, and queer people of color. And this is something that originated in the Black and Latino LGBTQ communities of Harlem. But before I get into reading and some of the related terminology, I want to talk about why this is related to gendered language. So drag queens are usually performing some kind of gendered performance or exaggerating some kind of feminine stereotypes. So as I talk about the discourse practice of reading, I want you to think about how it might be related to stereotypes of women as catty, bitchy, attitudinal, or gossipy. Another thing I want you to think about is the concept of language change and evolution versus appropriation and how those relate to reading and the related terminology. So the terms that I'm going to talk about are things that were created in very marginal communities, the LGBT communities of Harlem, and now a lot of these terms are viral slang. So how many of you have ever used the word shade? Okay, shade has become extremely popular in the last couple of years. So one question I like to think about is, who gets credit for the terms and who popularizes them? If you've ever heard of vogue or voguing, who do you think of? Madonna, the person on the left. But voguing is a dance style that was created again in the Harlem Black and Latino drag communities. So, reading, a verb, to read. This is to performatively insult someone, to call attention to someone's flaws. For example, I will read you to filth. A read, a noun. This is a word or phrase used as a taunt, insult, or mockery. Was that a read? Asks RuPaul. The library is a concept. When we're talking about reading, it could be a spontaneous insult, but it could also be something that's very contextualized. And when there's a planned time that's going to be a performance of reading or a challenge to read each other, some people refer to that as the library, or the library is open. Shade. This is a noun. So where reading is a very explicit insult, shade is a subtler, more indirect or implicit form of insult. I wouldn't wear it, but for you it's cute. That's shade. And shade expert Dorian Gray from the documentary Paris is Burning. Shade is, I don't tell you you're ugly, but I don't have to tell you because you know you're ugly, and that's shade. Or, oh honey, I'm so glad you saved up to buy those glasses. That's blatant shade. I didn't insult the glasses or you directly. It's implied, my voice in context of what I said, you know you're ugly. Throwing shade. This term is used a lot these days, and the meaning of it, like we talked about with evolution, has changed. But originally this meant to non-verbally insult somebody. So we have Diva Aretha Franklin dipping her hand for Diva Patti LaBelle, that's shade, and Michelle Obama throwing shade at John Boehner. No tea, no shade. This is an expression that means no disrespect, no offense. I'm not trying to offend you, or I'm not trying to come for you, but this is how it is. And you can reverse it like Coco Montrese. All tea, all shade means I am about to offend you. Okay, so getting into some linguistic research, Jeremy Calder at Stanford has done a study on reading, and he looked at this as a performance and concluded that there is actually a rhythmic style that a lot of people take on when they are performing, reading, or doing a read. And this could be something that builds solidarity within the community, And some of the features that he looked at were like variety of rhythm in clauses, more clause final lengthening, and less pauses in the reading, so basically creating this fluidity of rhythm. And we'll see if I can get 15 seconds.
The library is open, darling.
Trixie Mattel. Making fun of you is like shooting clownfish in a barrel. Unfortunately, that's about as fishy as you'll ever be. Miss Fame. I think everything about you is so original, except for those lips, those cheeks, and oh, everything you present to the judges on the runway.
Okay, so that's a read. And then in my own research looking at drag queen terms of address, I found that all of the terms of address followed a normative feminine pattern, and even when critiquing and reading is going on, that pattern remains. And so while you're tearing someone down character-wise, you can still be referencing their membership in the drag community. And a quick example of that.
I don't have a sugar daddy, sweetheart. Everything that I've had, I've worked for. And I worked for to get, and I've built myself. So I need you to know that 100%. I don't have a sugar daddy. I've never had a sugar daddy. If I wanted a sugar daddy, yes, I probably could go out and get one because I am what? Sickening. You could never have a sugar daddy because you are not that kind of girl. Baby, everything I've had, I've worked for, and I've gotten myself. I built myself from the ground up. Bitch! No.
So there she's reading her, it's very rhythmic, and she's using all these feminine terms at the top. And now I'm gonna do a quick speed round. Tea, that's gossip. Spilling tea, that is gossiping. Serving some kind of realness, for example, serving 1940s housewife realness means you're presenting yourself in a particular way. Serving face is when your lip-syncing mouth is very on with the words. Sissy that walk means you're pummeling the runway, your walk is amazing. Gagging is kind of like, I'm shook, which is a more recent slang. Gagging is like, that was shocking, I'm gagging. Beat is when you put on makeup, a kiki is a party, and fishy is feminine, and that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, so our next presenter is Caroline Myrick, who's going to be talking about Latinx, gender, and gendered languages. And Caroline is a PhD student in sociology studying sociolinguistics with a focus on gender, language ideologies, and underrepresented communities. Caroline teaches courses in sociology, English, and women's and gender studies, and is on the LDA leadership team.
All right, thanks. Sorry, I had the longest intro. All right, so language and terminology acts as a catalyst for people to self-identify and label. But history and linguistics have shown us that language hasn't always and isn't always inclusive, especially when it comes to folks who don't identify within its confines. Luckily, language has the ability to change and evolve over time. Meanings can change, new words can emerge, and this cultivates new spaces for inclusion. Latinx acts as an evolutionary term, providing people of Latin American descent a gender-inclusive way to self-identify. So today I'm going to be talking about Latinx and how it cultivates this inclusive space within the gendered language of Spanish. So, what is a gendered language? Well, we say that a language has formal gender when we talk about assigning arbitrary gender to nouns. So for example, in Greek, a door is feminine, the wall is masculine, and the floor is neuter. All right, go figure. So we say that languages have natural gender, like in English, when we give inanimate objects the it or neuter pronoun, when we give animate males the masculine he pronoun, and we give animate females the feminine she pronoun. Now, Spanish is a Romance language, one of many, and it is a language that has both formal and natural gender. Spain started seeing the rise of gendered and neutered nouns after the Reconquista. And then in 1492, when Columbus was doing his thing, Queen Isabella decided to standardize Spanish. So the first grammar book of Spanish was written, and we see a simplification of the pronoun system to now, instead of how it was really complicated in Old Spanish, now just have masculine or feminine options, no more neuter option. So what we are left with is the Spanish that you know today, where you have the options of el gato, if it's a boy cat, la gata, if it's a girl cat. But then what happens when the two of them are together? Well, los gatos. You have to use the masculine as the neutral, the generic, the all-encompassing go-to. Now, some people say, okay, well, this default masculine, that's just an arbitrary part of formal, arbitrary gender, right? But many disagree and say that this is actually more than just arbitrary and has more than arbitrary consequences. For instance, in an online survey that Hola America did, asking Spanish speakers how they felt about these gender-assigned words and that default O, that default masculine, many people pointed out that that tends to underrepresent a lot of people. It can erase women, and in a way it's putting men first, one argued. So an example of this is if you have a room full of 100 women and 1 man, according to your grammar textbooks in Spanish, you're supposed to say Latinos, right? So what do we do? Latinos? Our other option is what? Latinas? So this is one example of where Latinx can fill a void. So what is Latinx and where did it come from? Well, around 2012, you start seeing it pop up on places like Twitter and Tumblr, where like everything is born these days. And by 2014, we're seeing it in college newspapers. And then by 2015, actually in academic peer-reviewed journal articles, many of which are written in English. These days, you don't have to look very far to see it plastered all over campuses, painted on walls, online, offline, etc. All well and good, but not without its opposition. So, some people argue that by replacing these O's and A's with X's, we are defiling the Spanish language. We're disrespecting it and perhaps even erasing it. Whether or not you agree with this position, critics do raise an important question, and that is, how do we pronounce this X? So here's a job posting that was actually on campus a couple months ago. If you were to read this out loud, how would you do it? Well, advocates of this X system have given multiple options, including the ow sound, the oo sound, the x sound, and the tisk sound. But the important point remains that X is not a letter that represents a phoneme in Spanish. It's not a sound that's there. So, many people have pointed out, including Google, that the users of Latinx are in the continental US. As a result, some go as far to argue that Latinx is a form of linguistic imperialism. So they're saying it's one more example of the US forcing its culture onto other parts of the world. Something important to think about. However, let's think about why it might be really important to use the term Latinx. So the biggest reason is that it actually can help dismantle systems of oppression. And a couple of those systems, you might have heard of them, include the patriarchy, as well as the gender binary. So we can actually think about language as a feminist act, which is pretty cool. If we think about that forced inclusion of the feminine with the masculine, like saying Latinos for men and women, Latin Americans, that's excluding women from language. It forces women to ask themselves, are they speaking about me when they see things like a book that says un químico, a chemist, above a woman chemist, because the word chemist in Spanish is a masculine word. So there have been some attempts at getting around this over the past couple of decades. The O/A, which you might be familiar with, or much more recently the @ sign, kind of creative, includes the O and the A. But what's the problem here? This is relying on a binary. So what happens when you are one of the many people who don't identify on one of the poles of this crazy and fluid and creative and amazing and complicated thing that we call gender? Well, you're in luck, because Latinx provides a really inclusive term for those who identify as genderqueer, or as gender fluid, or as gender neutral, or as trans, or as another non-binary individual. So it's pretty great because it, in essence, really is advocating for this term latinidad, which is talking about this huge diversity that comes with being from Latin America. So hopefully this has shown you a way that language can be a revolutionary act, but of course the decision's up to you, so what do you think about gendered language? Thanks.
Right, so our next presenter is John Forrest, who's going to be talking to us about masculinity and discourse. And John is a PhD student in sociology, studying sociolinguistics and workplace practices. His research focuses on the ways in which the workplace conditions language use and the effect of occupation on language variation and change in the South.
All right, so like the title suggests, I'm going to talk a little bit about masculinity and discourse. So essentially the way that men construct masculinity through the way they talk and how they talk. So to first establish, I don't know how much groundwork we need to do for this, but we show gender to others through actions or performances, right? Gender isn't something that just you have, it's something that we keep showing to each other with how we act, with how we talk, with how we dress, and with how we behave in general. We show gender to each other and we read each other's performances. And this is how gender sort of plays out on a day-to-day basis. And a great deal of gender performance happens between men too. Now Caroline brought up the patriarchy as a system of gender oppression, and one really important thing to do when you're talking about a system of oppression that is gender is to look at what's happening in terms of maintaining and keeping power. So we need to look at men in addition to looking at disempowered groups, because that tells us how this system keeps perpetuating itself. And men aren't automatically perceived as masculine. They have to show it. Just like anyone else, men have to keep performing masculinity not only to people who don't identify as men, but other men as well. It's really important between men to show that you're masculine, to show that you're keeping up, that you can lay claim to the power and the benefits that masculinity gives you. So what does it mean to be masculine? We have a lot of ideas of this in popular culture, right? You can look on lots of commercials, television shows, and you can get ideas of this. Big things like you're strong, right? You're strong both physically and emotionally. You don't cry, you don't show emotion outwardly, and you're, again, physically strong. You're competitive. You're jockeying for position between both men and other folks. Like if you're in a company, you're trying to push to be the top of that company, always do better. You're heterosexual. Heterosexuality is a really important component of masculinity that is assumed to be part of like what an ideal masculinity would look like in popular culture. And also you need to be homosocial. So what I mean by homosociality is that men need to be friends with other men. It is really important to have man-to-man connections and friendship, because these are really important for maintaining your masculinity. So how do men show masculinity? How do you do that? Well, one of the actions we can use is language, just broadly right? We have language, how we talk, and what words and pronunciations we use. So we'll get, in linguistics, we dig into not only the words you say, but how you say them, and that helps to show other people that you're masculine. So what's a really good example of masculinity through discourse? There are lots of examples we could choose from, but I think there's one nice word, and that's dude. Dude is a great word. We all know it. We probably all use it. We've definitely all heard it. But it's more complicated than you might think if you dig into what dude means and how we use it between each other. So who uses dude, and who do they use it with? Well, that's a really great question. So if we look at the data here, a really quick graph of showing just how many times people use dude by gender. So the shaded bars represent the gender of the speaker, and then the two left and right represent the gender of the addressee. And the really important thing to note right here is that overwhelmingly this is something that men say to men. So we talked a lot about homosociality and what that means. Well, what are men doing with dude between each other to maintain these masculinity things that we talked about? Well, there are different kinds of dudes. There are a lot of different kinds of dudes. So let's go through a couple meanings of what dude could be. So there's the first exclamation, like, I saw a great movie yesterday. Oh, dude, I saw that. That's one dude, right? That means something. Confrontation, that's not what I meant, dude. Very different meaning of dude, but you know kind of what it means, right? It's not as aggressive as saying, that's not what I meant. It's a little bit of a mitigation on the end. That's not what I meant, dude. A little softer. Affiliation, just like reference. What's up, dude? How are you doing? And that's a very different use of dude that is really more directly to the addressee and referencing who they are. So let's focus a little bit on confrontation and affiliation in terms of meanings. There are a couple other meanings that I won't get into. But let's tie this back into what we've talked about with masculinity, right? So how does dude show masculinity? Well, think about dude for affiliation and helping to maintain homosociality, right? This is something that men use between each other, and it's something that you only use for other men. It's kind of a marker of group membership, right? You belong in this circle, and you are also a member of this masculine group, and we can exclude women from this, right? That's another really important component of masculinity, is excluding women from it. So what dude helps to do in these situations is keep women out, keep men in. It allows for competition without too much outright threat. You'll notice, like, when men talk to each other, there's a lot of banter that goes back and forth, right? And it's always, like, jokingly competitive, but that's important with masculinity, and you have to keep that competition going, but you don't want it to be too overtly threatening, because then you threaten friendship bonds. So this is a way to mitigate that a little bit. And it maintains the display of heterosexuality. So if you think about it, dude is almost never used as a term of address for a significant other. Like, I don't go home and talk to my significant other and say, "What's up, dude?" as I get home. That's not normally how we address each other. And because it doesn't have that connotation as something that you could say to a significant other, there is no connotation that there might be some kind of like homosexual attraction going on there. And avoiding that is really important for masculinity as well. So even looking at just like dude, which seems like a simple word on the surface, really tells you about how men replicate masculinity with each other, how the system of gender excludes people in terms of power, and how this thing keeps going. And it's just one of many examples. And we're talking about a lot of other things in the way maintaining gender and stuff today, and this is just one example. So, thank you.
So our next presenter is Frankie Pennington, and she will be talking to us about femininity and the F word. And Frankie is a first-year graduate student in English linguistics. She is co-treasurer for the Language Diversity Ambassadors, and her research interests include language diversity in institutions, language as forensic evidence, and documentation of endangered languages.
Okay, so we're not going to be focusing just on the F word, but it kind of flows better to the title. So just to begin, some of the language and social ideologies underlying gender kind of are underlying these ideas that we're going to see about women and swearing and the taboo that goes along with that. So these are some things that we may have heard, some things that people might have said to us as women. Women shouldn't swear because it's unfeminine. It's only socially acceptable for men to swear. Women will be perceived as masculine if they swear as a result. Women who swear are aggressive, obnoxious, and have bad attitudes. Women who swear are unintelligent and have poor and limited vocabularies. So some of the seminal linguistic research about gendered swearing is from the 70s with linguist Robin Lakoff and her paper and subsequent book, Language in a Woman's Place, and just by the title you can kind of assume what the content will be like. So Lakoff notes that stronger expletives are reserved for men and should not be used by women. Weaker expletives are reserved for women and should not be used by men. So here's some examples of the stronger and weaker expletives from this time. An example of something that Lakoff notes should be used by women or might be used by women is, "Oh dear, you put the peanut butter in the refrigerator again," whereas the stronger expletive, which you might expect to be used by men, would be something like, "Shit, you put the peanut butter in the refrigerator again." Today, option A may be something more like crap or dang it, as opposed to "oh dear." So we do still have these weaker expletives, but they may have changed a little bit over time. So something Lakoff notes is that in relation to these two examples, it's true that many self-respecting women are becoming able to use sentences like "we," self-respecting women, and me, I guess, without flinching, but this is a relatively recent development. And while perhaps the majority of Middle America might condone the use of "we" for men, they still disapprove of its use by women. So today we still have this feeling, this attitude by a lot of individuals in society. So who actually swears more? What's the reality here? A 2010 study in a university in New Zealand found that male university students reduce their levels of swearing in structured academic contexts more than female students. So in this case, women are swearing more And then in a popular study last year conducted by Social Research Council, Lancaster University, and Cambridge University Press in the UK, found that women swear more than men, and the use of the F word in particular by women has increased by over 500% since the 1990s. So some of you may have seen this. I want to end on this. We'll watch just a little bit of it.
Pretty. Pretty. What the fuck? I'm not the pretty fucking helpless princess in distress. I'm pretty fucking powerful and ready for success. So what is more offensive? A little girl saying fuck or the fucking unequal and sexist way society treats girls and women. It's our future. So listen up, grown-ups. Here's some words more fucked up than the word fuck. Pay inequality. Women are paid 23% less than men for the exact same fucking work. And women who graduate university with straight A's get paid as much as men who only got C's. So bad grades equal more bank just because you're a boy? Hello and hell no. Pay up, motherfucker. I shouldn't need a penis to get paid. Rape and violence. Fucked up fact. 1 out of every 5 women will be sexually assaulted or raped by a man. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which one of us will it be?
So some of you may have seen this. It was circulating around Facebook a while ago. But the idea here is that a lot of viewers of this video will be more offended by little girls swearing than the social issues that they're talking about: gender inequality in the workplace, rape statistics, etc. So thank you very much.
So our last presentation is going to be from Katie Connor, and she's going to be talking to us today about We Are the Crystal Gems, Steven Universe. Title, We Are the Crystal Gems. And Katie Connor is a graduate student in English linguistics. Her research interests include queer linguistics, language and gender, children's media and literature, education, and language and discrimination.
All right, so I'm closing y'all out today. I'm apparently the only person who forgot the title slide, so forgive me for that. So I'm talking about Steven Universe specifically. If you don't know what Steven Universe is, here's your primer. Steven Universe is a cartoon that was created by Rebecca Sugar for Cartoon Network in 2012. It's currently ongoing. It's in the middle of its 4th season right now, actually. Rebecca Sugar actually has publicly identified herself as bisexual and said that she created this show specifically to be dominated by feminine and female trending characters to tear down and play with the semiotics of gender in cartoons for children. The whole idea of this cartoon is that you've got these aliens or like strange beings from this other planet who have come to Earth to help save the Earth. And then you've got a half gem, half human boy, Steven, who also works with them and is the title character. Basically the idea is that these characters are agender. They are queer, despite the fact that they take she, her, hers pronouns. In many cases, they aren't actually female. They just present feminine forms. Rebecca Sugar said that she was really concerned with the fact that boys' children's media was so different than girls' children's media. And she was like, I'm not understanding why we have to have these two very specific separate things, basically blue cartoons, pink cartoons for little kids. So the whole premise of this is kind of playing with the idea of what is acceptable in children's media and what is acceptable for children to be seeing on screen. Just for the purpose of this presentation, a crystal gem has been described as projections of light, ageless aliens, and they maintain humanoid forms. And fusion is the ability of gems to merge their bodies and abilities to form new and more powerful personalities. This becomes important. The subjects of my study were Ruby and Sapphire, who are actually the unfused form of the character in the top right there, Garnet. So why this study specifically? Looking at the specific definitions of my study, I'm operating with sex as a biological construct referring to a physical body and chromosomal makeup, although those are controversial issues as well. Gender as a social construct traditionally viewed as a binary of male and female. And I'm looking at gender identity specifically, or the idea of a gender performance, a discrete construction of somebody's gender as they choose to perform it through semiotic, linguistic, and other resources available to them. Ways that we can describe this, so I am a cisgender female. My physical form
matches the gender that I identify as, but my gender performance includes things like the clothes I wear when I decide to wear makeup versus no makeup, the jewelry I wear, the way I speak, whether or not I drop the F-bomb occasionally perhaps. So things like that, and that's really important because it's different, separate, but related to sex and gender. And in a lot of past studies in linguistics, they've conflated these ideals. So the point of this study and my research specifically, I'm looking to complicate the ideas of masculinity and femininity outside of sex and gender as it hasn't been done before. Looking at reproducing the way that people speak specifically in the world around us, and then also looking further at how we create realistic, reflective, and authentic LGBTQ identities in entertainment media, especially media which is consumed and primarily marketed towards children and adolescents. So don't be scared by these plots. They are not as scary as they look. Ruby is in red and sapphire is in blue. So traditionally in linguistics, when we're talking about producing words and vowels, we would expect a male trending chart to be really wide, taking up, got that reversed. You would expect a male chart to be very centralized, not using as much space. The idea is that typically there's a stereotype that males mumble, they're not using as much, they kind of talk in a more monotone voice. And then you've got a lot more expression, a lot more use of space by females. However, looking at these two characters, one who's supposed to be masculine, one who's supposed to be feminine, you're not actually seeing that. Looking at these two charts, they actually look pretty much the same, which wasn't what my study expected to find. Looking at these charts, what we would expect, how many here kind of have this stereotype that women speak in some sort of higher voice than they would expect a man to speak if you're listening to somebody? So hands up if you think females speak higher generally. Yeah, so that's what we'd expect to see. However, Ruby, who's supposed to be the more masculine of the two characters, actually ends up having a much higher vocal range than Sapphire does on the right. We see Sapphire actually speaking in a very low range compared to Ruby. Again, this was really surprising. Why are we seeing these two characters that are supposed to be doing one thing to say, I'm more masculine, I'm more feminine, to be doing different things? Answer, we don't know. And that's important to recognize. In the past, linguistic research has focused overwhelmingly on cisgender, again, matching identities, and heteronormative identities, so only looking at men and women. There's been a lot of look at gay speech specifically, lesbian speech specifically, bisexual speech specifically, but we haven't seen a lot of research into agender or queer identities. And this is a problem. We're not able to explain why we think we see these things, but clearly we're seeing these things being produced in real life. If we can't answer these questions, how are we supposed to look at the way that we're portraying identities that Karen has talked about to children in our media over and over again? So future work to be done in my kind of research, continuing to look at how we produce masculinity and femininity, extending to other characters, looking at how we look at those characters and how we identify people as masculine or feminine, even when they don't take gender specifically. And then again, looking overwhelmingly at LGBTQ identities and how we represent them better in media around us. Thank you so much. So now we're going to take a couple of minutes, we have a little bit of time. If anybody has questions for any of the presenters that remain, and if you have questions for KellyNoel, we can provide her email address to you so that way you can ask her questions as well. Any questions? Yes. Me? Carol. Yes. One second.
Share screen.
Okay, I'm ready now.
What was your initial reaction when coming across the gender neutral term for latinx?
My reaction? Well, honestly, I think it's been interesting to gauge other people's reactions, and there really is still this ongoing argument, both sides of which hopefully I presented, equally. One of the biggest ones being, how do we use this in spoken language? And that was my reaction too when I first started seeing it pop up, was this is awesome as a writing tool. How are we gonna bring this into spoken language? And I don't have a great answer for that yet. Like I said, right now there's 4 or 5 different pronunciations of this X symbol that people are offering, and there's not really a set one. I think that once that gets figured out, it could probably become more widespread, but I think that that's probably what's holding it back. But I think that thinking about the pros and cons are important. It's important to think about linguistic imperialism, like that's a real issue. But I love that it does offer a much more inclusive option than using the @ sign or using the /a, because now we're not restricting ourselves to the binary.
Do you think it's a positive linguistic imperialism?
Well, that's a great question. I think that the intentions behind it are 100% centered on gender inclusivity and not some sort of cultural dominance from what I've read.
Okay, so it's about the first presentation about the Disney princesses. So, okay, I know that Moana is like really recent, but does that kind of show like following the trends that you have quantified, or does that kind of jump off of it or something?
Great question. So you've actually hit my Achilles heel because I haven't actually seen Moana yet. So first of all, I have to wait. Because of the way my research is set up, I actually have to wait because the only movies that I study are movies that have been officially incorporated into the Disney Princess Entertainment franchise. I think that Moana is most likely going to be slated for that, but there's like this weird, huge ritual induction ceremony. It's all very strange, and I have to wait for that to happen before I include it in my study. But from what I've read about it and from impressions of my co-researcher who has seen it, I think that it is, at least on the level of plot, moving in a really positive direction, a more nuanced direction. On the other hand, I did not get to touch on this, but the movies that star women of color tend to follow slightly different rules than the films that star white women, because a lot of times the sort of American ideal of their culture ends up influencing the script itself. So if you think about Pocahontas, for example, all of the movies that are set sort of in the 1400s and 1300s or 1500s that star white women are all very still use a lot of really modern language, but then suddenly we're talking about Pocahontas and Native American culture, and everybody's like, "Father, I am so glad to finally see you." And she's like 17-year-old girl. So it's weird, right? And so I don't know. I have not seen Moana, but I don't. I'm always a little bit skeptical when linguistically speaking, when they put out a new movie like that.
Nope, sorry. No other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you didn't sign in, we have a table in the back where you can get some free pins, and please sign in so that way we can see you. You can also leave your email with us so we can reach out to you for further events. If you don't already follow us on Facebook or Twitter, you should do that. Thank you so much for coming to this. Oh, yes, thank you. Final talking point. Tomorrow night is the world premiere of Talking Black in America, which is a documentary, really, really important, follows the story of African American English in America and about its cultural relevance and the controversies that have surrounded it. It's premiering tomorrow night at the Hunt Library at 7 p.m. 7 p.m. It is free and open to the public. We're also having an event on April 4th where we will also have a panel of experts, including our very own Walt Wolfram, who helped produce the film and stars in the film as well as 2 other experts on African American English. We would love to have you there. We would love to have you guys being part of the conversation and learning about this. You can find more information about that on the North Carolina Language and Life website, Facebook, or Twitter as well, or you can reach out to us at the linguistics department if you'd like to find out further. So please come to that. It's going to be amazing, and again, it's free and open to the public.
And after the premiere, we will have a special showing of Moana, which I watched 6 times this weekend.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great night.